Okay, so kia ora
Hi.
koutou, wonderful to be here
Hi.
tonight. Thank you so much to Sylvia for organising this, and Nicola and Petra also for being part of the event and bringing us into this wonderful space. And thank you for that opening, Petra, that brought us together as a group. Okay, so the topic of this talk is eco-anxiety and the psychology of climate change. And I'm going to start with just thinking about the psychology of emotions. So anxiety is a type of emotion. So what are emotions? Now, a psychologist that I refer to a lot is Barbara Fredrickson, who writes about emotions as having three different components. So one component is that something's going on in our body. And it's interesting, that word feelings. We say, how are you feeling? Which implies a bodily sensation and is often used as a synonym for an emotion. The second thing that's going on with an emotion is that our mind is filled with thoughts and images. So from a psychology point of view, it's not an emotion if there's just something going on in the body. There has to be things going on in the mind that tell us this is the kind of emotion that I'm feeling. And the third component is that emotions lead to certain action tendencies. So I'm going to work through a little bit about the theory of emotions before we get right into how climate anxiety sits within this sort of three-part image. So let's look at this lovely picture of a father and his daughter who are experiencing what we could call, and you can just instantly see, because we're also good at reading body language, is some kind of positive emotion, joy, togetherness, something along those lines. And if you look at their bodies, you can see they're quite upright and they're quite open. They're actually sort of oriented outwards. You can see the smile on the father's face, even though we can only see a partial profile, and you can see it very clearly on the daughter's face. So that's the nature of, if you like, their bodies. Now, what are they thinking about? What are the thoughts and images going through their minds? Well, this beautiful natural environment they're in. I suspect the daughter can see a playground or a set of swings or something in the corner. And what do they want to do? What's their action tendency? Well, it looks to me like it's something like play, and it looks also very much like it's playing together. So they want to be in each other's company, probably being physically active in this space. Now, according to Barbara Fredrickson's theory, what positive emotions do is that they open us up and make us see lots of possibilities and be willing to take risks. And they also make us more creative and cooperative. So negative emotions, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about climate anxiety as a whole, and we'll get to specific ones a bit later, tend to make us tense or lethargic. So instead of being kind of open, a lot of tension, or we actually can't be bothered, that feeling of real sluggishness in our body. And I know you'll all be familiar with it. Another thing that negative emotions do in terms of our mind, the thoughts going on, is that they focus us on the issue. So very often we become obsessive when we're in the state of a negative emotion about whatever it is that we're thinking about. And we'll get to that in relation to specific ones. And the action tendency with negative emotions is ideally to solve whatever it is that's bugging us, that's going through our mind, as quickly and directly as possible. So let's imagine you have a dodgy looking spot on your arm. You feel a whole lot of tension, fear in your body. Your mind is thinking about what that could be. Probably, ideally, you make an appointment with a doctor to try and find out and solve that problem as quickly as you can. Now, the tricky thing about climate change is, unlike that spot on your arm, there isn't somebody you can go to who can tell you what the problem is and how to solve it. So with some negative emotions related to certain kinds of thoughts and images, like the fear of a planet that's got sea level rise and all the rest, instead of being able to just solve it, you can sometimes want to get rid of the emotion in order to not keep it going, because it cannot be directly solved. So you could end up in a denial or a stuckness or a kind of rumination about the problem because you can't take the action that you need. And very often people with sort of chronic climate anxiety are in that kind of state of persistent thinking, obsessive thinking, but not being able to do anything. So I want to talk a little bit about fear and anger in particular, because they're really big emotions around the whole climate movement. Now, when we feel a threat, if we have two very common tendencies, one of them is to withdraw, which is a fear tendency, and the other is to fight or attack, which is an anger tendency. Both of these are going on, and both of these are what we call negative emotions. We're very focused on the issue and want to solve the problem. This, by the way, it's not super clear, but this is Sam in the Game of Thrones. So anyone who's a Game of Thrones fan, a little bit of nostalgia coming your way. Sam has just seen White Walkers. They're essentially zombies. And so his reaction is to hide behind a rock. Perfect. And you can actually see, probably not very clearly, a very classic look of fear on his face. Now, the thing is that fear is an emotion that tends to make us become very self-centered. We tend to be thinking about me, my family, the people closest to me, and so on. And it's actually exacerbated by a sense of abandonment. So, you know, when you've seen that dodgy spot on your arm, and we've all had that experience, you think, oh my goodness, this could be a really serious health issue. And you've gone to the doctor, and maybe it actually is, or maybe you've been reassured. Either way, in many ways, the worst time of all is when you're looking at and experiencing the fear and uncertainty and aloneness of that initial sense that something might be going badly wrong. And even when things are going badly wrong, if you're in company of others who are also helping you hold the problem, it's not quite as bad. So I want to say that one of the really key things about fear is a sense that somehow you're all alone in this. Even if sort of theoretically you're not, it's an emotion around that. Good when it prompts going to the doctor about the dodgy spot. That's why we've got fear, because it makes us react really quickly and sometimes in appropriate ways. Now, anger, again, is actually rather a fashionable emotion. Personally, I'm not enamored with it, and I try to control my own anger, and we'll come to the end in thinking about whether it's appropriate to display fear and anger, particularly as an adult in the presence of children. But anger is I would say, has become a fashionable emotion. This is Daenerys Targaryen, who's about to set the city behind her on fire with her dragons. Can't remember why she's so angry, but she's got an angry face. But there's an even better example in relation to Greta Thunberg. This is quite a few years old, but if you look up images of Greta Thunberg, who's, you know, the poster child for sort of the youth climate change movement, you will see this forward-leaning, very, very tense body. And what is going through her mind, because this is in her messaging, is you did something wrong, solve the problem. So anger is a kind of tearing down, telling other people what they must do. And it is strongly present in social movements. It seems to be motivating. It's, I would say, more motivating than fear, which is that very sort of self-related concept. Anger can be, in some levels, unifying, but it's an us-them game. They're wrong, we're right. So you might want to think about whether that builds the good society or not. So just to summarize, fear, withdrawal, self-protection, paralysis, anger, tearing down and demanding action of others. Now, sadness and grief has been a lot less studied, and they're in a sense milder emotions. Anger and fear are both emotions of tension. Sadness and grief tend to be emotions of, if you like, lethargy. They're less sort of hot emotions. And sometimes sadness and grief can inspire sort of a collective action towards climate change, as you sort of realise that these are things often that you're losing things you love and that you feel prompted to try and protect them. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a study on ecological grief that interviewed Inuit people who live on the ice, which I'm sure you all know is melting more quickly. So the winters aren't covered with solid sea ice to the extent they used to be in places like northern Canada, and with Australian farmers who live in very drought-prone conditions and often see their farms effectively unable to produce anything due to these conditions. So ecological grief is a concept that's used for people who are living close to the land and who are seeing the land around them change before their eyes. And it's especially important when these people's livelihoods and identity are sort of all bound up in the natural environment. The Glenn Albrecht has, and I'll show you the results in just a second, but Glenn Albrecht has talked about this phenomenon called solastalgia, which is a homesickness that you can feel when you're actually at home. And I think it matches very well to this concept of ecological grief, because that is a sense that this is my home, but now it isn't like it was. And, you know, as you can see, I'm a fan of popular culture. Anyone recognise this scene? Very hard question. Stranger Things. Stranger Things. So Stranger Things is a TV series, and it's set in the town of Hawkins, and it has an upside down. Now, what the upside down is Hawkins, the town, but instead of it being normal, it is covered in vines and it's dark and there's monsters. And Barbara here is in her home swimming pool, which is usually lovely and joyful, but it's turned into the upside down and she's actually about to be sucked under and drowned. So, this nostalgia, I think, is a really powerful way of trying to sort of imagine what it's like, the disorientation of being at home but not at home. This is just a picture here of the sea ice breaking up in northern Canada, and a picture of the kind of state that some farms in Australia are on. So I'm just going to read you a few quotes from these two studies just to get the sense of it. I'm sure you can't read them from there. But this is an Inuit respondent to the interviews. It's challenging when you're living a different lifestyle, but then still living in the same place. And talking about his parents, it's who they are. It's what they've grown up doing. And their parents have been doing it forever. So, I mean, they're kind of losing a sense of who they are. Talking about his elderly father, he must feel like he just got picked up at one place and put right, or somewhere like a different planet. Inuit people are people of the sea ice. If there's no more sea ice, how can we be people of the sea ice? And here's some Australian farmers. There's nothing that makes me more depressed than to see the place, dust lifting off the place. It's really terrible, the place blowing away. If you put it in physical terms, to see a paddock that's been overgrazed and blowing away, I can almost, it sounds a bit funny, it almost physically hurts to see someone's topsoil, might belong to a neighbour. I look at it and I cringe. I hate seeing the farm lift. It says to people, I'm a bad farmer. And I think farmers are good farmers. They're all trying hard to be. They love their land. Losing the farm would be like a death. There's a grieving process because a farm embodies everything that the family farm is. I think if we were to lose it, it would be like losing a person. If you took the family out, I don't think the family would make sense. It's like it's lost its context. It's lost its niche. So one of the things I think that's important to kind of remember here is that there are people who are suffering real physical loss now, and there are people who are anticipating future loss. And very often eco-anxiety or climate anxiety is actually a kind of anticipated loss. So, I mean, I know there are people in New Zealand that have been subject to major weather events and so on. As a whole, generally, most people in New Zealand that are sort of really gripped by this are actually anticipating future losses in a kind of abstract sense, more than have actually seen stuff change around them in a way that's changed their lifestyle and capacity. So eco-anxiety is defined by the American situation as a chronic fear of environmental doom. It has a it's sometimes called pre-traumatic stress, because the trauma hasn't necessarily happened, but you're imagining it. As imaginative creatures, this can still result in very profound emotions. So I'm going to just run through now some material on climate anxiety in particular and break it down at these 3 levels of bodily sensations, thoughts and images, and action tendencies. So this is a New Zealand site that has put out some health, it's actually called Health Navigator. So for people who are feeling climate anxiety, it provides a list of symptoms and then some possibilities as to how to manage these. So if you look at those symptoms, and you don't need to see it in detail, it describes either a tense or lethargic body, which is what we talked about earlier in relation to negative emotions. It suggests the images you might have are of an uncertain future. And the action tendencies, the things you might feel you want to do, are nothing. So you feel apathetic. You might become impatient with other people and withdraw from other people. Now, one study I'm going to spend a little bit of time on was a study done with 10,000 young people aged between 16 and 25 years. And the researchers picked 10 countries from different continents. Australia's there, New Zealand's not. And I'm going to show you some of the data. You probably can't see this, so I'll try and explain as clearly as I can from these 10 different countries. And I'm going to particularly contrast Finland, which was a country chosen in Europe, with the Philippines, country in the North Pacific, because they have quite different results for interesting reasons. So this graph here, hopefully you can at least see the colours on it. This graph here, the purple bars show the extent to which climate change anxiety has an impact on everyday activities. So if you look at the purple lines above, and this very top line here is for all countries, and then these are particular countries, you can see that 45% of correspondents overall said that climate change was having some effect on their everyday functioning. Now, the red, orange, and yellow bars, if you put this together, are young people who said that they were extremely worried, red, very worried, orange, or moderately worried, yellow. So just being able to glance at those colours, you can see that the great majority, 84% of young people, were at least moderately worried about climate change. And if we look at the numbers in Finland, we find that, I haven't actually added up these numbers personally, but that's Finland and that's the Philippines. And in the Philippines, only 5% of young people were not worried. In other words, 95% were at least moderately worried in the Philippines. Many fewer, and 22% were not worried in Finland. This is going to be impossible to read. Sorry, I didn't have an image of the size of the screen. But these are some of the emotions, and I'll just read them out to you. 90% of young people in the Finland reported being sad about climate change, 54% in Finland. 90% in the Philippines were afraid, 54% in Finland. 70% in the Philippines were angry, and 48% in the Philippines. I mean, there's kind of 2 points here. One is that, generally speaking, young people are worried. Yeah. And the question today isn't whether that worry itself is correct or incorrect or anything else. It's just, this is what young people are reporting, and we'll get on to talk about what the role is in managing that. But I do want to point out that, as many of you will have been thinking, that the difference, there's 2 probable differences in why Finnish young children, young people are not as worried as them in the Philippines, is that the Philippines in a disaster risk index is actually, in a 2021 world report, is actually the 8th most vulnerable country in the world to disaster risk. And there's 2 factors related to how the index is made up. One is the sort of physical geography of the country, and the Philippines is are islands that have large coastal areas that are very vulnerable to sea level rise and other big weather events like hurricanes and so on. But the other factor is how well the infrastructure in the country, how much wealth and it has in order to address those issues. Finland on this ranking of 1 to 181 was ranked number 171, both less vulnerable from a geographical point of view and has much better disaster risk management infrastructure to deal with it. So I really want us to kind of bear in mind we're always dealing with these two things, the imaginative element, what can happen in the future, and the real element that this is happening now to us, and we don't know how to manage it. And it varies across location. Mm-hmm. Now, the other factor I want to bring in with this study, which sort of builds up to this apocalyptic narrative I think we live in, is that young people also did not feel that their governments were doing enough. So, for example, in the total here, 64% of young children said that the government does not take my concerns seriously, and 57% said the government's not acting in line with climate change. These are just all of the countries bundled together. And this graph, which you might be able to see, and I'll sort of explain what's going on here, is that number 3 here is number 2 here is negative thoughts about climate change, and number 4 is feeling betrayed by the government. And what you can see is a correlation between those two results of 0.47, which indicates, sort of in the take-home message style, that the more you feel betrayed by your government, the more you also feel distressed about climate change. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't say what order those are going in. So it could be you feel distressed about climate change, so you feel more betrayed by your government. But those two are a package that seem to go together quite strongly. So if we think about building this sort of psychological schema of what it's like to be an eco-anxiety, and we have these things from the New Zealand website, this study shows that government incompetence in inaction is actually a thought that is racing through the mind of people that are anxious about the climate, and the image of an insecure and chaotic future. It's actually pretty heartbreaking to imagine those children in the Netherlands who feel that their family is at imminent risk of losing their livelihood. It's a hard thing to sort of hold in mind. And that study also suggested that one of the action tendencies is an inability to do normal tasks, normal daily tasks well. So what I suggest is that we've created, and I'll go a little bit more into how I think we've created this, remembering the role of the imagination. We've created very high levels of worry alongside a low sense of trust in governments and corporations, and a low sense of trust that we will be heard in relation to our anxieties about the climate. And personally, this is kind of my addition, I think this is exacerbated by the individualist societies that we live in which, and one of my students has actually done a project in this, in which there's a lot of messaging saying it's on you to fix it. Now, it's not quite that direct, but it's basically there. We tell 16-year-olds that you can change the world. I've actually heard that said. I don't know, maybe in some vague theoretical way, if you kind of try and put that together, that's sort of feasible, but in almost every practical sense, it is not possible to change the world. It is not a meaningful statement. And so we put out there all the stuff saying the planet's going to rack and ruin, all the stuff saying governments are useless, and then we say fix it. And again, this is just putting together the messages that are always said more subtly than that, but see a few heads nodding. Now, just to finish this piece, here's the catch about anxiety. When I was very first a student here, I did English literature and I did poetry, and one of the poets featured was somebody who just did these big billboards that had just a few lines on them that were posted all over town. And the one that I remember is that she did a billboard that said, "Anxiety is vigilant." And I never forgot that. It's the only thing I remember from English poetry. But it is true, because remember, when you've got a negative emotion, you're obsessed with the issue, you're thinking about it all the time. So this is the weird kind of paradox or whatever that we're facing. Anxiety, people who are more anxious about climate change are more likely to take opportunities to mitigate problems when they come their way. So they'll recycle, use the compost bin, bike rather than drive the car, all that kind of stuff. Strong emotions about climate change are related to support for climate change policy, more likely to vote for that, more likely to engage with, groups like Generation Zero. And a kind of practical anxiety encourages young people to take action. So we sort of get ourselves in this conundrum. The question that I want to, and I've just added these highlighted bits, that anxiety, it's not all bad, because it does create this focus and attention, readiness to spring into action and support for policies. So here's the question: should we be fueling anxiety to save the planet? And I think a lot of environmentalists implicitly answer that with yes. They might not have thought it all through, but that's their gig. So we can kind of come to whether we should be doing that very soon. So again, we are doing this, and I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but you all know there are masses and masses of very scary communications out there in the mainstream media and on the internet about the effects of this kind of thing. And I do exercises in my classes where I get the students to identify the words that trigger high levels of emotion. And this one, for example, where they're talking about the carbon dioxide levels being the highest in human history for the past 3 million years. Do you even know what 3 million years is? They talk about the spectre of climate change that looms ominously over the planet. This is a particular example of a dust storm that's reached the United States from Sahara. Beautiful pictures, beautiful kind of images, it does have that whole apocalyptic thing going on with its beauty and terror, as well as its beauty and terror. Yeah, both of those. So, and then things like swarms of locusts, a vast plague, invasions, just, the language, this stuff. I don't really need to go over it. So as well as that, to go back to my other point about the politicians are useless, there is a ton of media. If you're in the environmental space, politicians are useless, big companies are not doing enough. This is terrifying. This is actually, this is a series of headlines I got from the internet, including the one I find the most depressing: Auckland transport overhaul won't reduce emissions. And so we've been being fed with this stuff all the time. I call this an apocalyptic double play. The planet is going to wreck and ruin. The politicians are useless, and you need to face the truth. And sometimes I think in environmental circles that if you are not anxious, angry, and fearful, you are not playing the game correctly. There's actually not an opportunity to be calm, to have your fear under control, and to see hope and possibility. And that those emotions are the sort of badge of eco-credibility. Yeah, it's not great. Well, I don't know, maybe it is great, because then people become activists and we save the planet. Anyway, so just moving on here, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to do a little bit of thought exercise, and I'd love to hear your ideas on my suggestions for what we should do. I do want to talk a little bit about hope. Now, that's another fashionable emotion, and it's used in lots of ways, and there's lots of beautiful poetry about it. Just talking about it from a sort of psychological research point of view, there are at least two different kinds of hope from this perspective. One is motivational hope that encourages collective action. And the key to motivational hope is the idea that there is a possibility, doesn't have to be a certainty, hope's never about certainty, that the future could be better. And it's presented in such a way, you're going to be doing an exercise soon, so listen carefully to my words of wisdom. It's presented in such a way that you are sort of enabled to take part in that. Very different from saying it's on you. So just to repeat that, motivational hope suggests that there is some kind of opening in the future and it's possible for you to play a part in it. That's motivational hope. Complacent hope is hope that says that basically she'll be right, mate. So complacent hope is a kind of, it's under control, and so any emotions to the contrary are just unnecessary and redundant. Complacent hope does not invite you to take part because it's all under control. That's complacent hope. So one of the things I think one of the questions we can put to ourselves is the kind of hope we're after here. So this is where I'm going to get you to do a little exercise in groups, and I'm going to divide the room. So you're going to get one task or another. Now, this is a young girl, and she's saying this. And you know what's, again, heartbreaking? Young people are saying this. Because of climate change, I might not get to be an adult. If I'm still alive in 10 years, I won't have a job or anywhere to live, and I can never have children. So that's your 10-year-old. That's your 10-year-old saying this to you. Okay, you are right. This is to create anxiety. You are right. We're in a terrible situation and nobody's doing anything about it. You should try and save the world. Do it now or all will be lost. Pretty much what you said. And, you know, this is a scary thing. People do say that. Okay, so let's look at, I'm just going to try and minimize that so I can see my own screen. Okay, moving on, just need to go down here. So this is complacent hope. There are lots of adults concerned about climate change. They have it all under control. No need for you to worry because soon we'll have the technology to solve these problems. And that's complacent hope. Here's the final one that I've put forward for motivational hope. There are lots of people concerned about climate change. Hello. They're working very hard to find solutions. All over the world, scientists, engineers, teachers, community leaders are getting together. People have solved really hard problems before. Let's find a group you can join. So, you know, if I was a young person, I heard that. I can imagine a future. It's not closed off. It includes me. It wants my gifts. And I am not alone. So, you know, that I think is, and that's your motivational hope. So these are like my last sort of pearls with more of my ideas. And I'm really love to hear from you as to what you think about these or anything else. So what is our role? Should we, going back to the question, should we refueling anxiety to save the planet? And I guess other alternatives to fueling anxiety to save the planet. One that I advocate very strongly is controlling your fear. And I love that statement at the back, I'm scared too. I think that's actually a really interesting statement for us to think about that a lot. Because of my role in sustainability and psychology, I do go to talks on climate science and to hear about the future of the planet. I find them very difficult. To be honest, I'd rather not attend because it is difficult for me. For example, if somebody talks about sea level rise, particularly about things like the ice, I'm losing the word. Chunks of ice sheets, ice coming off the Greenland, off the Antarctic, and sea level rises of sort of 10, 100, whatever meters. I go into a fear space, and do you know why? Because our house, I've looked it up, is 7 meters above sea level. And do you know what that space makes me want to do? Fight climate change? No. It makes me want to sell our house and move to Mount Albert. I mean, that is the reaction, a sort of selfish, how can I preserve that? But one of the things I also find interesting about being in a space where people are talking about the physical things is you can say hard things in a way that doesn't generate fear. And it's so much to do with how you present it. And it's so much to do with not closing off the future. They're not presenting it as if it's an absolute. It's so much to do with simultaneously saying to people something about you will be in community through all this. And with my own children, so I've actually got 3 children and now 2 granddaughters as well. And when I think about their future, it's actually not the state of the planet that really is what I want for them. It might sound whatever it sounds like, but I want them to live in love. Actually, what I want. I want them to live in love. I want them to live surrounded by people who have the capacity and interest to pull together and to be together in this space. So if I kind of hold that in a space where I'm a leader, you know, with young people, I'm giving lectures all the time. I don't necessarily say that, but if I hold that, I think you can work the bad news in a way that's not crippling and shutting down. So I strongly advocate controlling your fear, but you know, we can definitely get into that when I've gone through this list. Be a witness to the fear of others, so that controlling your own fear doesn't mean you deny other people's fear, especially young people's fear. And it's quite funny because I was with my granddaughter stayed the weekend. Goodness gracious, I was exhausted because they're 4 and 2. But in the middle of the night, one of them woke up and started going, I want mummy, I want daddy. So the other one woke up, I want mummy, I want daddy. And you know, there they were crying and crying. And so I went in there and I said, yeah, you really want mummy and daddy. When I was little, I really wanted mummy and daddy too. When I was little, my mummy and daddy went to dinner parties, and the 4-year-old took a big gulp and said, what are dinner parties? and so it was like, yeah, just you don't deny the fear, but you can sort of distract from it or something like that. And remember, the future is genuinely open, people. I get so whatever when people say they know that the apocalypse is coming. It's like, excuse me, we live in a complex system with so many things going on that are unpredictable. I just find it astonishing that you feel that whatever tools you have tell you exactly what's going to happen. And never tell young people it's on them to sort it out. It's that, you know, you can be part of this sort of messaging. So that's my stuff. That's it. So please, comments, questions, thoughts, anything.